Hey guys, it's been a while. Today I'm going to be covering the opening to the new season, the 2024-2025 NFL season. We'll be reviewing each and every game of Week 1 and who I believe is going to win and lose each matchup. And to not stall for time, let's get right into it. Our first game of Week 1 takes place on Thursday Night Football between the defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs and the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens were one of the best teams in the league last year. A lot of people thought they were going to win the Super Bowl, but they actually lost to the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game, and now they will have their chance to get their revenge against the Chiefs. The Ravens in the offseason got Derrick Henry as their new running back, but they did lose their backup middle linebacker in Patrick Queen, who is a really good player, and meanwhile, during the offseason, the Chiefs completely revamped their main issue of last season, their main position group that was causing issues, which was their receivers, as they were having a lot of drops. They were really inconsistent, besides Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice. But Travis Kelce even had a down season, and Rashee was a rookie. Rashee Rice is now entering his second season. Who knows what will happen with him, as he was arrested in the offseason for a crime involving a car crash that he fled the scene from. So it's unclear whether he'll play every week, whether he'll be there for Week 1 or not. But as of right now, it seems like he will be, as nothing has been stated on that case. They also drafted Xavier Worthy, the fastest recorded 40-yard dash time ever, with a 4.21 speed 40-yard dash this past offseason. And they also signed Hollywood Brown in the offseason. I do think that Derrick Henry will get an immediate start and hit the ground running, whereas the receivers for the Chiefs may take a little bit of time to mesh. However, they do have Patrick Mahomes as their quarterback, which really does help that whole mesh happen. So the Chiefs are the better team. The Ravens and Lamar Jackson have yet to have... They tend to play the Chiefs pretty poorly, and so for that reason, I'm choosing the Chiefs to win this game. Then on Friday Night Football, we have the Eagles versus the Packers out of the country. The Packers in the offseason didn't do a ton, but they changed their running back room. They signed Josh Jacobs and got rid of Aaron Jones, which is a little controversial. Aaron Jones missed a lot of time due to injury. However, and Josh Jacobs didn't really miss much time in his whole career due to injury. However, he had a down season last year after leading the league in rushing the season before. He ended up only averaging under 4 yards a carry last season, and the team didn't have very good rushing efficiency. They also signed a new safety in Xavier McKinney from the Giants, who is really, really good. And so it'll be exciting to see how good he can be in that defensive backfield. Eagles, on the other hand, lost a few pieces, nothing too insane, but they lost Kevin Byard to the Bears. They lost a few other guys on that defense, but they signed Saquon Barkley, which should be a huge boost for their running back room. Great out of the backfield, great receiving and rushing. So the Eagles are definitely a better team than the Packers. The Eagles on paper look like they're one of the best teams in the NFC, but after that collapse last year, it's really hard to say that they're for sure going to be. That being said, though, the Eagles are seemingly the better team, and I'm going to pick the Eagles to win. Our first game of Sunday football is going to be a divisional matchup between the Panthers and the Saints. The Saints in this offseason didn't do a whole lot. They signed Chase Young, and that's really their biggest move. He is kind of a shot in the dark. He was a second overall pick back in 2020, right after Joe Burrow, and had an amazing rookie year, and then got hurt in his sophomore season, and really hasn't been the same player since. He did look pretty good for the Niners, but he seemed to really give up on a lot of plays last season. but the Saints are still a decent team, and if Derek Carr can perform how he did towards the end of the season, in the last few weeks, then maybe the Saints will have a really good season. However, there's no guarantee, as Derek Carr was really inconsistent last year. The Panthers, on the other side, are looking to take a big step with Bryce Young. Hopefully he can take a big jump this year, as he did not look good in his rookie season. The whole team was abysmal, and they ended with the worst record in the league. But they were able to draft and sign a few players. They signed some offensive linemen, some pretty expensive ones, including a center from the Dolphins for $100 million. They also drafted Xavier Legette and Jatavion Sanders and Jonathan Brooks, being a receiver, tight end, and running back, respectively. And I'm really excited, honestly, to see Jonathan Brooks. He was the first running back taken. He's coming off an ACL tear from Texas, and looked really good and explosive all of last season. But as I said, he's coming off that ACL tear. Should be good for the beginning of the season, but no guarantees there. But that offense should be improved. Defense, on the other hand, lost Brian Burns as they traded him to the Giants. So they should actually, and they lost Frankie Louvu and Jeremy Chin, both to the Commanders in free agency. So that defense might look worse than it did last year, and it wasn't very good last year. The Panthers really shouldn't be that good of a team this season, so I'm not going to pick them to win. I'm going to pick the Saints, but the Saints shouldn't be anything too impressive. So if the Panthers upset them in a divisional game, no surprises there. Following that game, also at 12 o'clock, we have the Vikings versus the Giants. For those of you who remember, this was actually a playoff matchup in 2023, in the 2022-2023 season, where Daniel Jones then got a contract extension, 4 years, $160 million, which the Giants have since clearly regretted, as he was really bad last year. And they had a rotation of quarterbacks. He then tore his ACL, and they put in Tommy DeVito, and they put in Tyrod Taylor. This season, Daniel Jones is their starter again, but he actually has a weapon this time, as they drafted Malik Neighbors with the 6th overall pick. He should be pretty good and really help that offense. However, they did lose Saquon Barkley and Xavier McKinney to the Eagles and Packers, respectively. They did replace Saquon with Devin Singletary, who's a consistently good running back, but he's no Saquon Barkley. Biggest move, however, for the Giants in the offseason was trading for Brian Burns, who should really improve that defensive line, as they'll now have Brian Burns on one end, Kayvon Thibodeau on the other, and Dexter Lawrence in the middle. So that D-line should be pretty good. But the rest of the defense isn't really anything too special. They did lose Xavier McKinney, as I mentioned earlier. And the Vikings, on the other hand, drafted a new quarterback. They gave up Kirk Cousins in free agency, and they drafted J.J. McCarthy, who is a very controversial pick. He was picked at number 11. He's a winner, but he's not showing up on the stat sheet as consistently as some of the other quarterbacks have. So it's very difficult to see how good he'll be as a rookie. He could hit the ground running. As I said, he is a winner. He won every single game last year in college, has only lost one game since high school. However, he doesn't light up the stat sheet, so it's really hard to say. I'm still going to pick the Vikings. They have a better offense. They have a slightly worse defense because their defensive line did get worse, but they did have a few really key signings, especially some Texans players, but they did lose Danielle Hunter in the offseason. But that being said, I'm going to choose the Vikings. I do think they're a better team than the Giants, but I could see this game going either way. Up next, we have one of the easier decisions of the week, but it's a matchup between the Patriots and the Bengals. The Bengals in the offseason did lose DJ Reader, their defensive tackle, to the Lions, and they also lost Tyler Boyd, who signed with the Titans. But other than that, it's pretty much the same Bengals core. Joe Burrow should be returning. He will be playing in Week 1. And assuming they don't start how they have each of the past 2 years, with a very rough first few games, this season could be different. Joe Burrow's been there for most of training camp and the preseason, and so things should be different for the organization, and they're a really good team. They have high expectations this year. Patriots, on the other hand, they were awful last year. And in the offseason, they improved their receiving core a bit by drafting a few guys, and they also signed KJ Osborne. They also drafted Drake May with the 3rd overall pick, and they have Jacoby Brissett. As of the time we were recording this, it's still unclear as to who will be the starter for Week 1. However, I don't think it really matters. The Bengals should win this game pretty easily. They're a much better team. The Patriots are really bad. Should be improved this year, but still not going to be a good team, so the Bengals should win. Up next, we have a matchup between the Steelers and the Falcons. And both of these teams had major quarterback changes in the offseason. They both got 2 quarterbacks in the offseason, as the Steelers signed Russell Wilson for about $1 million as he was released from the Broncos, is getting paid all the money that he was owed by the Broncos, and so he signed a vet minimum deal with the Steelers to give him about $1 million. The Steelers also traded for Justin Fields. They gave up a 6th conditional 4th round pick for Justin Fields, and as of right now, it's unclear who's going to be the starter. Justin Fields got a shot in training camp. I'm sure he'll get some work in the preseason. But as of right now, it's unclear which of the 2 quarterbacks will start, but either should be an upgrade over Kenny Pickett. The Falcons, on the other hand, signed Kirk Cousins in the offseason. Huge free agent signing, but he's 36 coming off an Achilles tear. So it's really unclear as to how he'll recover from that. They also drafted Michael Penix Jr. with the 8th overall pick. However, it's unlikely that he will get much playing time this year, as Kirk Cousins was signed for a lot of money. They're not going to not start him. The Falcons look like they could be really good contenders this year. And the Steelers also look like they could be pretty good, both of which are very based on their quarterback play. This is a really hard matchup to choose. I'm going to choose the Falcons to win this matchup, as I do believe Kirk Cousins will bounce back from that injury. I think at this stage in their career, Kirk Cousins is better than both Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, so I'm going to choose the Falcons to win this, but I could really see this game going either way. Up next, we have a divisional matchup, which is a rematch of their Week 18 matchup to make it into the playoffs between the Texans and the Colts. Last time, the Texans won, which gave them the win in the division and gave them a playoff berth, and the Colts lost. It was a really close game. Both teams should be really good this year. Anthony Richardson's coming back from injury. The Colts drafted Adonai Mitchell in the 2nd round and got their pick of who they wanted defensively, as they were the first ones to draft a defensive player in this year's NFL draft at pick 15. That should be a huge boost to their defense, as they picked a pass rusher. Texans, on the other hand, they had a great offseason. They traded for Stephon Diggs. They signed Danielle Hunter to be on the opposite end of Will Anderson Jr. They really are going to be an exceptional team this year. And CJ Stroud, if he can keep up what he did last year, they should make the playoffs very easily again. I'm going to choose the Texans, as I think Anthony Richardson's return might be a little rough, but I think he'll play pretty well. It's just he needs to get reaccustomed, as he barely played last season and then missed a lot of time due to injury as a rookie. So I'm going to choose the Texans because they have more experience. But the Colts should still be a really good team this year. Up next, we have the Cardinals versus the Bills. And again, this is another really easy matchup. Cardinals should be much improved from last year, as Kyler Murray should have a full, healthy season. They just drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. with the 4th overall pick. They finally have a really good receiver. But behind him, they have Trey McBride at tight end and really nobody else on offense. The Bills, on the other hand, did lose Stephon Diggs in the offseason. Their whole wide receiver room looks very different, as they now have drafted Keon Coleman. They signed Curtis Samuel, and they still have Khalil Shakir. I'm really excited to see what that receiver room looks like, but I don't think this matchup is much to think about. The Bills are a much better team than the Cardinals, and so therefore I'm going to choose the Bills to win this matchup. Following that matchup, we have the Tennessee Titans facing off against the Chicago Bears. Both of these teams should look very different from last year, as the Titans had a pretty good offseason. They traded for L'Jarius Sneed, one of the best corners in the game, from the Kansas City Chiefs, and then signed him to a multi-year deal. They also signed Calvin Ridley to a 4-year deal, and they signed Tyler Boyd. Their receiving core should be much better than last year, as last year they were relying exclusively on DeAndre Hopkins, and this year they have 2 other receivers right behind him. That being said, DeAndre Hopkins is hurt. He got hurt in training camp. It's unclear when he'll be back, but he should be back pretty early in the season. Will Levis hopefully will take a big step up this year, as he showed a lot of flashes in his rookie season. He threw 4 touchdowns in his first game, but then after that, he only threw 4 touchdowns to 4 interceptions in the next few games. So kind of very on and off for Will Levis. The Bears, on the other hand, had one of the most eventful off seasons of any team in the NFL. They drafted Caleb Williams with the first overall pick. They were 7-10 last year, but because they had the Panthers pick, who ended up getting the first overall pick, they were able to take Caleb Williams and trade away Justin Fields. They also signed a lot of free agents, as they signed DeAndre Swift. They signed Kevin Byard to be their safety. They traded for Keenan Allen for a 4th-round pick. Really, really good offseason for the Bears. I do think this team will take a little bit of time to mesh really well, and there will be some growing pains as they have a rookie quarterback. They drafted Rome Odunze, a rookie receiver, to be behind Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. But that being said, their offense looks star-studded. Their defense was really good at the end of last year. I'm going to choose the Bears to win this game. I wouldn't be surprised if it took them a little bit to get used to this team and mesh well, and so I wouldn't be surprised, therefore, if they lost, but I'm still going to pick them to win. I really do think they have a good chance. Up next, we have a really interesting matchup, and it's our final matchup of the 12 o'clock window, as it's the Jacksonville Jaguars taking on the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins lost a lot of pieces this year. They lost 2 of their linemen. They lost Xavier Howard. They lost Christian Wilkins, who signed for a huge deal with the Las Vegas Raiders in free agency. But they gained a few good players, too, as they signed Jordan Poyer. They also had a pretty good draft, as they drafted Chop Robinson in the first round, a good edge rusher. That defense, it's really unclear whether it will look better or worse, but they'll have a few key guys coming back from injury at some point this season, as Bradley Chubb and Javon Holland and one other player on their team got hurt towards the end of last season. They should all be returning, but the Dolphins were a really good team last year, didn't really live up to the hype in the postseason, but who knows? They're a really good regular season team. The Jaguars, on the other hand, signed Trevor Lawrence to a $55 million a year extension, making him tied for the highest paid quarterback in the league. They also lost Calvin Ridley, but they signed Gabe Davis and drafted Brian Thomas Jr. They also released Zay Jones, so their receiving core looks really different, as their 1, 2, 3 now are Brian Thomas, Christian Kirk, and Gabe Davis. They should be also really good contenders this year, just like the Dolphins, but I think they're going to have a rough start, as I think the Dolphins are the better team here. So I'm going to pick the Dolphins to win this. The Jaguars have a rough schedule, especially at the beginning, but once they can get over that, I think they'll be a really good team. Up next, we have the Broncos facing off against the Seahawks. The Broncos drafted Bo Nix in the first round. They released Russell Wilson, and they released Justin Simmons, who still yet to be signed, surprisingly, by any NFL team. They are going to be a bottom feeder team this year. They are not looking very good. However, I do have some hope for Bo Nix. He's got experience. He should be relatively NFL ready. However, I don't think he's going to be that good as a rookie. The Seahawks, on the other hand, traded for Sam Howell to be their backup quarterback. Kind of irrelevant since Geno Smith will start week 1. However, that does have a chance to change if Geno Smith has a rough season. They also drafted Byron Murphy, the defensive tackle out of Texas, in the first round, making that defensive line a little bit better, as they had one of the worst run defenses in the league last year. They were letting up so many rushing yards. So that should improve, especially from Byron Murphy. The Seahawks are a much better team than the Broncos. I think this one's pretty easy. Seahawks should win this game pretty easily, but we'll see what happens with the Broncos and Bo Nix. Up next, we have a divisional matchup between the Raiders and the Chargers. The Chargers this offseason got a new head coach. They have Jim Harbaugh now, and that should be a huge boost to their offense and defense. He's an amazing coach, huge step up from Brandon Staley. They also had some changes in their receiving room as they traded away Keenan Allen to the Bears and released Mike Williams, who got signed by the Jets. They now have a receiving core of their rookie, who they just drafted in the second round, Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnson, their first-round pick last year, who was not very good, and Joshua Palmer, who has been consistently decent. It'll be interesting to see what that offense can be like. They also had some changes in the running back room as they got rid of Austin Eckler in free agency, and they signed both J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, as well as drafting a guy in Kendall Vidal. I guess we'll see what that running back and receiver rooms shake out to be. Raiders, on the other hand, they signed Christian Wilkins in the offseason. Huge boost to that defensive line. He'll now be playing opposite Tyree Wilson and with Max Crosby, as he should be an elite defensive tackle. They also signed Gardner Minshew to compete with Aiden O'Connell for the starting role at quarterback. It's, as of me recording this, it's still unclear who will take that starting role. But given the fact that they signed Gardner Minshew to a multi-year deal, it looks like it's more likely to be him. The Raiders might have a rough season offensively, although they did draft a rookie tight end in Brock Bowers, and Michael Mayer is entering his second year. Zamir White will be taking over the backfield as Josh Jacobs left in free agency for the Packers. And they signed Alexander Mattison to be his backup. So that offense should look pretty different as they have a new quarterback, a new running back, and a new tight end. They should be a decent team. They might be contenders. I don't think they'll make the playoffs, but I think the Chargers should have an easier time in week 1. It might take some time for them as well, as they have a new head coach, as well as a completely new offense. But I think Justin Herbert alone makes this game the Chargers to win. Up next, we have a matchup between the Cowboys and the Browns. The Browns should have Deshaun Watson returning. They traded for Jerry Jeudy in the offseason. Other than that, they didn't have too much eventful stuff happening, with the exception of the return of Nick Chubb, which it's very unclear how he'll return, as his injury was very brutal. So we'll see how that returns. The Cowboys, on the other hand, did almost nothing this offseason. They lost Tony Pollard and re-signed Zeke Elliott, who is now their starting running back after doing worse and worse every single year of his career. And so their running back room looks abysmal between Ezekiel Elliott, Deuce Vaughn, and Rico Dowdle. So that is a huge step back for that running back room, as Tony Pollard wasn't elite last year, but he was still a serviceable running back. They also lost Stephon Gilmore in free agency, who I believe is yet to be unsigned at this point. So that should be a hit to their cornerback room. However, they have Trayvon Diggs, one of the best corners in the game, coming back. They now have two ball hawks in Trayvon Diggs and Deron Bland playing together, as they only played a few games together last season. Both of these teams should be pretty good this season, but I'm going to pick the Browns to win this. I think Deshaun Watson might have a rough game, and Nick Chubb might have a rough return, but I think that defense will carry that team, and I think the Browns will get the win. Following that, our last 3 o'clock game on Sunday is the Commanders versus the Buccaneers. The Commanders did a lot this offseason. They signed a lot of veterans. They got pretty old. They drafted Jaden Daniels with the second overall pick, who's going to be the starter. They signed Austin Eckler, Zach Ertz, Frankie Louvu, Bobby Wagner. That whole team is completely revamped. It should look a lot better. But that O-line was very abysmal last year, and we'll see what happens with that this year. They also have a new head coach in Dan Quinn, who came from the Cowboys as their defensive coordinator. The Bucs, on the other hand, re-signed Mike Evans, re-signed Baker Mayfield, lost a few pieces on defense. Shaq Barrett retired, and they also lost Devin White to the Eagles. But They still should be contenders this year, especially in the division that they're in. I'm going to choose the Buccaneers to win this game. I think the Commanders are going to have a rough start as those pieces really need to learn how to mesh together. But they're all veterans and should have some experience, so I'm sure it won't take too long. But I'm still going to pick the Buccaneers to win this game. Following that, we have our Sunday night football game, which is a rematch of a wild card game between the Lions and the Rams. The Lions this offseason signed DJ Reader to be their new defensive tackle, just boosting that run defense, which was not very good last year, and should improve this year. They also drafted Terrion Arnold in the first round as they really needed cornerback help because their run defense, while it had some issues at defensive tackle, their pass defense was the real problem in that defense, and so they boosted their pass defense by drafting a cornerback. The Rams should have a fully healthy Cooper Kupp this year, although I don't know how much that matters because Puka Nacua really took over last year. He should be their number one receiver this year. They also had a huge loss in Hall of Famer, or future Hall of Famer, one of the best defensive players of all time, Aaron Donald, retiring. They signed Jimmy Garoppolo on the same day, funny enough, and people were comparing it as Jimmy Garoppolo replacing Aaron Donald, which obviously is not the case, and Jimmy G might actually get cut. He's been so bad, but he's just a backup quarterback. Other than that, they didn't do too much. They drafted a defensive lineman in the first round in Jared Verse, and he should be pretty good as well, especially opposite his old college teammate. I think both of these teams are going to be really good this year. I think the Lions are going to be better than the Rams, so I'm going to pick them to win. But this is going to be a really close game, just like it was in the wild card, but the Lions should come away with a victory. And our final game is on Monday Night Football. Yet again, the Jets play on Monday Night Football. Let's hope Aaron Rodgers doesn't tear his Achilles on the fourth snap of the season this time. But yet again, the Jets are hosting a Week 1 game on Monday Night Football. This time it's versus the 49ers, the losers of the Super Bowl last season. The 49ers drafted Ricky Pearsall in the first round to be another receiver in that receiving corps as they are unsure what is going to happen with Brandon Ayuk as of the time of me recording this. It seems like he will likely end up on a new team, but he recently rejected some offers, so it's very unclear where he'll end up at the beginning of the season. But I think that really does affect the play of this team. Brandon Ayuk is very crucial to this team. They also lost Eric Armstead in free agency as they were unable to come to an agreement, and they really lowballed him, but he's not returning. He went to the Jaguars. Also, Christian McCaffrey strained his hamstring in the preseason. He should return for the regular season, but will miss most, if not all of the preseason due to this training camp injury. The Jets, on the other hand, had a pretty eventful offseason. They drafted an offensive lineman. They signed an offensive lineman from in free agency. They also signed Mike Williams, who got released by the Chargers. That offense should be much improved, and that defense needed absolutely minimal work, as it's been one of the most elite defenses in the past year. The Jets should be really good and might even be a Super Bowl contender, but it is Rodgers returning from an Achilles injury that took him out after 4 snaps, didn't complete a pass last year, so I think a full year off football might take an effect in Week 1, but I'm sure he'll bounce back pretty quickly. I'm still going to choose the 49ers. I think they are one of the best, if not the best, rosters in the league, and while the Jets look really good, the 49ers have more experience, and Aaron Rodgers, coming off that Achilles tear, who knows how he'll play. But I'm going to choose the 49ers. Looking into our top 10 power rankings on the season, going into the season, at number 10, I have the Miami Dolphins. They did lose some key pieces. I think that defense will actually be worse than it was last year, and I think that offensive line might have some struggles. However, they were such an explosive team last year. I don't really see that changing this year, and I think they'll win a lot of games. and possibly even win their division since the Bills got worse. Up next, we have the Browns at 9. The Browns have Deshaun Watson returning. They made the playoffs last year even without him and a carousel of quarterbacks. They should be a really good team. Their defense is elite. Nick Chubb is returning. All of these are good things for that team. So I guess we'll see what they can do. At 8, I have the Jets. They were set up to possibly win a Super Bowl last year, and then Aaron Rodgers got hurt on the 4th snap of the season. He's returning, and that defense will still be one of the best units in the league. Plus, they improved their offensive line, which was a huge liability last year, and they signed Mike Williams. Much improved team, should be pretty good this year. At 7, I have the Bengals. Really hard to count them out. They almost made the playoffs with Joe Burrow hurt last season, and Joe Burrow has now returned. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins will both still be there. That offense should be explosive. They did unfortunately lose Joe Mixon, and they're now relying on Zach Moss. However, Zach Moss had a pretty good season last year, so we'll see how that goes. But the Bengals, while not the best in their division, as you'll see later, should still be Super Bowl contenders. At 6, I have the Eagles. They should be much improved from last year where they seemed very on and off. They had a horrible end to the season, but I think they'll bounce back. They have Saquon Barkley now. They have Devin White. They should be improved, and I'm excited to see what that team can do, as if they can perform anything like they did in the first half of last season, they should be really good. At 5, I've got the Texans. They were really good last year. They made the divisional round where they lost to the Ravens. However, they now have Stephon Diggs and Danielle Hunter, which I think will make a huge improvement to both that offense and defense. So I'm excited to see what this team can do and what their ceiling can be and what C.J. Stroud can do in his sophomore season. At 4, I have the Lions. They only got better this offseason. They improved their defense with a cornerback and a defensive tackle. They didn't really need much help elsewhere. They re-signed Penei Sewell, their offensive lineman. They re-signed Amon-Ra St. Brown. They re-signed Jared Goff. They had a really eventful offseason, but not a ton of losses, so they should be nearly as good, if not better, than last year. At 3, I have the Ravens. It's really hard to count them out. Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry combo is going to be crazy. They did lose OBJ, but he didn't have too much of an influence in the first place. And Patrick Queen was a big loss, but they have Roquan Smith and Trenton Simpson to take his place, as Roquan Smith is one of the best, if not the best, middle linebacker in the entire league. That defense should still be elite. That offense should still be really good. Lamar Jackson coming off an MVP season and now gaining Derrick Henry. I'm really excited to see what this team can do, especially in the run game. So for that reason, they're at number 3. Number 2, I have the 49ers. On paper, they have the most stacked roster in the league. They now have an even better receiving core as they drafted a receiver in the first round. And we'll see what happens with Brandon Ayuk. That could really influence things. And we'll see when McCaffrey returns. But assuming McCaffrey is healthy for week 1, this team can't be anywhere outside of the top 2. Number 1, because it can't change until some other team can prove that it can. The Chiefs, they had their worst season last year under Patrick Mahomes offensively, and yet they still won the Super Bowl. There's no other team to put at number 1. Their offense got better as they now have 2 new receivers in Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy. That offense should be incredibly explosive again, and I'm excited to see what that team can do, especially with Patrick Mahomes. Let's see how this season goes for all these teams. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening today. I'm really happy to be back. I'm not sure how often I will be uploading, but I'm sure you guys will hear from me a decent amount this football season, so I'm excited for that. If you guys could comment, like, subscribe, that would be really appreciated. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.